You will learn how to build a React project from scratch, meaning we won't be using any frameworks. Instead, we'll just be using Webpack and React to bundle the application and display it on the development server in your browser. And if you know me from Twitter, you probably know that I don't really like working with JavaScript. Instead, I rather build everything in TypeScript. But to make stuff beginner friendly as well, we'll be running this project in JavaScript instead. And we will be building this React application using the latest edition of React, which is React 18. And as you might have heard, React 18 has some new features that we won't be going into detail today, because these are more complicated features that you don't really need in a beginner project like we are building in this video. And this project, like I said, is coming from the first chapter of my book React Projects. So if you have the book, you can also keep the book along and code with me to learn about all the examples. So I'm going to be assuming you have Node version 14 or higher running, and also NPM version 6 or higher on your machine. So the very first thing, like I said, to start a JavaScript workspace is run npm init. This will initialize a new JavaScript workspace with the command -i. This will create a clean JavaScript workspace, and it also generates a package.json file for us that we need in order to install Node.js and npm libraries later on. So I'm going to be running npm init -y, and this will generate a new package.json file for me. It has the name, which is the same as the project I created for this live stream, and then it also has some default information in there that you can just leave blank for now. So this is my package.json file, and we'll continue building onto this file later on. First, we're going to be installing Webpack. If you're not familiar with Webpack, it has been around for a very long time. And with Webpack, you can bundle JavaScript code in order to render it in a browser or maybe on a server. So what you can do, you can bundle the JavaScript files that we'll be building today in a package that is readable by your browser so your users can use it. And Webpack works a bit like this. You write your code in JavaScript, for example. You make relationships with order functions and different code files. You add some configuration, and I'll be showing how to add the configuration a little bit later. And then it will be bundled for you with an HTML file so you can bring it over to the browser. And Webpack currently has Webpack version 5 installed that we will be using in this application as well. So before we'll be using Webpack, we need to install it from npm. And for this, you can just run the commands npm install. And we'll be using --save dev, as we will be installing Webpack and the Webpack CLI as developer dependencies, so dev dependencies, because these doesn't need to end up in our bundled code. We only want Webpack to bundle our code whenever we're in development mode. As soon as you bundle your code and bring it over to production, it no longer needs to be bundled. It no longer needs Webpack, because Webpack is only needed before you bundle your code. After your code is bundled, you will no longer need it. That is why we would install it as a dev dependency instead of a regular dependency in npm. Whenever I run this, it will start installing Webpack and the Webpack CLI, which we will need to create a bundle of our code in a bit later. And depending on the speed of your internet, it might take some time in order to bring this over. So we'll just wait this out. And you can see it right here. We have dev dependencies, which is Webpack and Webpack CLI. And both are version 5, which is the most current version of Webpack to date. So with Webpack installed, we're ready to start creating our first JavaScript file. I'd like to start by creating a new directory called source. And in this directory, we will create a file called index.js. If you're using VS Code, you can just create a new file and type down source/index.js. This will create the new directory and the index.js file. Alternatively, you can also create a new directory first and then create a new file inside that directory. And what we'll be doing here is we'll be using a console.log message. Say, hello world, welcome to the live stream. So hello world, welcome to this very first live stream. It's the very first JavaScript code we're writing for this application. And now the next thing we need to do, we actually need to use our Webpack configuration to start bundling this code so we can run it somewhere. So to do this, we'll be creating a new script inside our package.json file. So this script section is where you'll set up commands that you'd like to run with npm. There's one command in there called test, which we not really be using today. Let me just break this down and create a new command called start. So this start command is something we'll be using to run our code together with Webpack. So in here we can write a Webpack command, which is Webpack. And then we're going to be saying if we use start, we want to use the development mode. So for this, we type down mode is development. I believe it's like this, but we'll check later. And then we also want to create a build script, which is used whenever we want to create code that's ready for production. We'll be using production, and we'll be naming the script build instead of start. So the start command is what we'll be using if we want to see the contents of our file locally whenever we're developing the code, while the build script is something we'll be using as soon as we're ready to bring this code over to a server in order to host it somewhere so our users can actually see it. So now we can start running the command npm start, which will then execute the command webpack with the development mode on. And as you can see from our output, it took the asset main.js, which we don't really, which is this one, main index.js. It took our file in source index.js, and then Webpack has compiled our code successfully in 206 milliseconds. So what do we mean with compiled successfully? Whenever you head over to the directory dist, which was just created by Webpack, which has a file called main.js, which you can see right here. And in this file, you can see the bundled and compiled code of whatever we have in source index.js. And as you can see, it's much more. It has Webpack in there. There's a reference to index.js. And then you can see this eval, which is saying, welcome to this very first live stream. Whenever we see this, it means our code is bundled and compiled, and it's ready to be rendered in a terminal, in a browser, whatever you like to render it. So for now, as we haven't set up any components yet, let's just try and render the JavaScript code directly in our terminal. So let's run node dist main.js, which is the file we just generated. And then you can see, hello, welcome to this very first live stream. So right now we've set up a plain JavaScript application with just a console.log. We've set up Webpack in order to bundle this code to make it ready for shipment to, for example, a browser. And in the next section, we'll be setting up React and ReactDOM to actually create React components that we can use directly inside our browser. So for this, we're going to be starting by installing React and ReactDOM. So these are the main packages that you need in order to create a React application. And as you can see, we're not installing these as dev dependencies, but as regular npm dependencies, because we need to have React and ReactDOM available in the browser whenever we're rendering our application. So let's install React and ReactDOM, and this should be installing React 18 and also ReactDOM 18, which are the most recent versions of React. And as you can see, it installed React version 18.2. And it's important to know which version of React you're using, because some earlier React versions don't have access to all the features that we'll be using in this live stream. And next to installing React, we also need to install Babel. So Babel is used whenever we're bundling our code with Webpack. If you don't insert Babel, it might be that some React features might be translated wrongly for the browser, meaning that you can render your code in the browser. And these Babel dependencies will be installed as npm libraries, which will be developer dependencies again. And as you can see, we're now finished. We add all these new libraries, and the list is already growing because we have multiple dependencies, and we also have some Babel and Webpack dependencies in there. So both Babel and Webpack are very important if you try to render a React application, because without using these dependencies, it will be really hard for you to create a bundled code block that you can render directly in your browser. Of course, there are other libraries that help you to set up React projects from scratch, but I just find Webpack is one of the easier ones. For example, you could also use Feed or one of the React frameworks, such as Create React App, or Next.js. As I said, we need to create two files. The first file is our Webpack configuration file, and we call this webpack.config.js. So this will be a JavaScript file that holds our configuration for Webpack. Let me copy and paste this directly from the ebook and paste it in here. So what does it mean? It means we set up a module that we export. It has a rule to exclude all the node modules and to use all the .js files and load them together with Babel, so the Babel loader. So this is what we would say for the webpack config.js file, and it's sufficient for now. We will be making more changes to this file later on. And we also create another new file that is called babel.config.js. .json actually, and this will hold the configuration for Babel. So it will first go to Webpack. Webpack will try and find the Babel configuration file, and then together they will bundle and render your code. Let me copy and paste this code block from the book as well. First, I will be setting up the presets. It looks something like this. And then I will be adding the specific dependencies in there as well. Let me set it up like this. And then just let me reformat the code using ESLint, which I've installed in my editor. So what does this do? It will take some presets. It will take the preset, the most common one from Babel. And it will also take a React specific preset that of course we need to render our React components. And we save this, so nothing happened so far. But instead, we now have set up our configuration to use Webpack and Babel together to run our JavaScript and React code, which we'll be handling in the next part of this live stream. And it's important to know that you can also place this Babel configuration directly inside your Webpack file. However, this will make it harder for us later on to make changes, maybe whenever we want to do code splitting, or if we want to put our configuration in different places. So I always recommend you to put this configuration in two separate places. And of course, in one of the later live streams where we'll be tackling one of the more complicated features in React, we're using JavaScript frameworks, or React frameworks actually, that mean we no longer have to set up this configuration ourselves, but instead this will be handled by the framework, such as Create React App or Next.js. So we already have Webpack installed, we have Babel installed, we have React and ReactDOM installed. This will mean we're ready to create a React application from scratch. So we have this file called index.js. Let me delete the contents. Instead, we'll be creating some new React component in there. For first, we need to import ReactDOM from the ReactDOM library, of course. And then more specifically, we need to find the client in ReactDOM. But then we create a new React component. And this is our very first React component that we'll be creating today. So let's call this component app, as it is our main application that we're rendering. Like this. Let's open it up. And let's return a header that we'll be doing. So what I didn't tell you just yet, we will be using an API in this application. And the API. So maybe you've heard of this television show that's called Rick and Morty. It's a pretty cool television show if you're into science fiction and cartoons, of course. So what we'll be using is their API. They have both a REST API and a GraphQL API. And normally I'm much more a fan of using GraphQL APIs as opposed to REST APIs. But as React Project is a book that tries to be beginner friendly, especially in the beginning of the book, I'll be using a REST API for just once in this live stream today. So we'll be creating a function called app. And in this app, we set a return. And what we will be returning is a h1 title element. And in here, we'll be saying Rick and Morty API. And then, of course, we also need to return this component. But instead of returning this component, we'll be creating a element container that we return together with React. So we're going to be using React in order to render this component. Write down const container. Get element by ID is root. And I'll explain you why this is important later on. Let me first just continue creating the container. Then we also generate a root, which will be taking our container. And then this root will render this app component that we have right here. So this is probably easier to understand because we have a app component and we're rendering the app component. But what is this root? This root is whatever JavaScript and React need in order to place the JavaScript file inside a HTML file that is needed by your browser. So for this, let me first save this file and then start creating a new HTML file in a directory called public. So this is called public. We create a new file called index.html. And as you can see, this public directory is at the root of our workspace for today's project. So it's not inside source. It's in the same level as the source directory, but it's called the public instead. And then we have a HTML file called index.html. And in this file, we'll be pasting the following code, which I am copying from the book on page number 10, in case you have the book React Project, the second edition. Let me format this code so it will look nicely in my editor. You can see I have a title here, Rick and Morty, which is the same title as we have in our index.js file. Actually, let me make this Rick and Morty API. And then you can see we have this section called a root, so it has the ID root. So what happens with the JavaScript file we generated here, we've set up a container which takes the element by ID root, meaning that if we start bundling and compiling this code, React will know that it should place the JavaScript files on the root element, which is directly right here. Because your browser, it won't render the JavaScript file, it will render the HTML file and then take the JavaScript and place it in there. So to make this work as expected, we need one final npm library, and this library is called HTML Webpack plugin, meaning that this will help Webpack to inject the JavaScript code directly inside our HTML file. So in our terminal, we need to be installing this npm library as well. Again, it will be a developer dependency. So let's run npm install --save-dev HTML Webpack plugin, which is the name of the plugin that we'll be using today. Let me press enter, and again, it might take some time in order to install this dependency on the project for you. And as you can see, it's all done. If you would go to your package.json file, you can see this dependency is also installed here. So in order for this new library to work nicely with Webpack, we need to add this configuration to our Webpack configuration file, which is called webpack.config.js. And at the very top of this file, we need to import this new dependency. So we have this file called HTML Webpack plugin, and we're going to be using the require to import it inside this file. And then at the bottom of our Webpack configuration file, at the same level as module, the same level as module, we need to create a new field that is called plugins. Let me add it here. It's called plugins. It's an array, as you can see right here. And then here we want to be using this HTML Webpack plugin. And as you can see, my editor is already helping me with this as I'm using GitHub Copilot to make coding a bit faster. So I want to use this new HTML Webpack plugin. And let me close it here as well. And inside here, we need to add some configuration. So what we need to do, we need to point this plugin towards a template, which is our public index.html file. And then more specific to a file name in here as well. So this way your plugin knows that it should search for the file inside the public directory, which is called index.html. And now if I start saving this, let me see if I've saved all the files. I guess I did. I can go to my package.json and see that I have created the command start, which we previously already used. And if I rerun this command, instead of creating the JavaScript file that we write here that says console log hello world, welcome to the very first live stream, it will take the React component that we created right here, just a very small React component, but still it's a React component, and create a JavaScript that we can run in the browser. So let me run npm start, and hopefully this will work smoothly. It will take our files, it will use Webpack in mode development, and then it should generate files that we can use in our browser. As you can see, it does a bit more than it done before. It also took way longer. It took almost 4 seconds. These are things you can, of course, optimize. But now it's created a index.html file, which has a relation, a reference towards main.js, which is the other file we have. It contains all the JavaScript code that is needed to run our React component. And to actually use this, the only thing you need is open this one in a browser. What I could do, I could take this file, go to my browser, and as you can see, it renders a small component with the Rick and Morty API title that we added in there. So the title is there, but the title is also here. So nothing strange, as this is exactly as we expected, because we created a component that renders a title, and the title is Rick and Morty API. And this is just how easy it is to create your very first React component from scratch. So you learned how to set up a React component, how to set up Webpack and Babel in order to render a component, and then use it directly in your browser.